The newborn was still in Isoria's arms when her own pack ordered her to leave the baby in the snow. When Isoria refused, the chief cast her out, and the mate who had shared her shelter for 3 years chose the pack instead of her. Isoria walked alone into the blizzard, expecting hunger, exile, perhaps even death. What she never expected was the enormous feral wolf who began following them, or the impossible truth hidden inside his scent, because somehow it carried the same strange note as the child she had rescued. Chapter 1. The deer was gone. Isoria crouched in the snow and pressed 2 fingers into the final track. The hoofprint was clean, but fresh powder was already softening its edges. She had been following the animal for nearly 2 hours, through cold so vicious that 20 minutes earlier it had stopped feeling like cold and become nothing at all. Now the trail was disappearing in front of her. The blizzard was swallowing it. Wind struck her face. Isoria turned into it automatically and read the air the way her father had taught her when she was young. Direction, temperature, whatever scent the wind carried. Tonight, it carried more snow. A great deal more. She needed to return to camp. She knew that. Isoria straightened and took 1 step toward home. Then the wind changed. Something slipped beneath its howl. A sound so faint that for an instant she almost convinced herself she had imagined it. High, thin, desperate. Isoria stopped. What was that? An animal? The wind twisting through the ravine? Then she heard it again. Her body moved before her mind had finished arguing. Not toward the camp. Toward the sound. Down into the ravine. She never truly decided to follow it. She simply did. She smelled death before she saw the body. A woman lay face down in the snow. Isoria approached carefully, one hand moving instinctively toward the knife at her hip. There was no danger here. Not anymore. She crouched beside the woman. The cloak immediately struck her as wrong. Too fine. Too carefully made for anyone who belonged to these wild lands. The woman's frozen hands had curled like claws. Her fingernails were split and cracked. She had been running. Isoria could see that clearly. The woman had run for a very long time. Then, when she had no strength left, she had curled herself around a bundle pressed tightly against her chest, and spent everything remaining inside her trying to keep it warm. The bundle was crying. Isoria carefully loosened the woman's frozen fingers. The cloth wrapped around the bundle was embroidered. Inside it was a pendant engraved with a crest Isoria did not recognize. And beneath the cloth was a baby. Tiny. Terrifyingly tiny. For one stunned moment, Isoria's first thought was that nothing so small could possibly still be alive. The baby's face was drawn tight with the effort of crying. Her mouth was wide open. Her eyes were squeezed shut. Every part of that tiny face seemed concentrated into one exhausted, furious demand for someone to hear her. She had not surrendered. That was what struck Isoria hardest. The child had no idea how completely the odds were against her. She simply kept fighting. She screamed into the storm with everything she had left, as though the world owed her an answer. "I hear you," Isoria whispered. The baby continued crying. "You're all right." Isoria stopped herself. She looked at the little chest struggling beneath the cloth. "No, you're not all right." She lifted the child gently. "But I've got you now." She tucked the baby beneath her furs and held her against her chest. Then Isoria forced herself to think. The tribe's stores had already been cut twice during this moon. 3 weeks earlier, Chief Brander had stood before every member of the pack and spoken the words no leader wanted to speak. No new births until the thaw. No additional mouths to feed. Not one. The vote had been unanimous. Isoria herself had raised her hand. That was how survival worked here. You made terrible calculations because refusing to make them could kill everyone. And Isoria already knew what that calculation would say about the child in her arms. The baby's mouth remained open, but her cries were becoming weaker. She was still fighting. She simply had less strength left with which to fight. Put her down. The sensible part of Isoria's mind whispered the words. You know what Brander will say. You know what Kale will say. Then one tiny hand slipped free from the wrapping. 5 fingers no larger than pine needles reached blindly into the air. They grasped at nothing, found nothing, and still they kept reaching. That same stubborn refusal, that same ignorant, furious certainty that somewhere in the world there must be something worth reaching for. Isoria extended one finger. The baby's hand closed around it. Isoria stared. All right, she whispered. The grip remained. All right, little one. She drew the baby closer. I've got you. She stood with the infant pressed securely against her chest and gathered the cloak and pendant. As she turned away, something on the ravine wall caught her eye. A flash of white against gray stone. One flower grew from a narrow crack in the frozen rock. A winter glory. Isoria looked down at the small face beneath her furs. Flory, she said. The name came to her complete and certain. Your name is Flory. Chapter 2. Isoria caught the scent of the camp before she saw its lights. As she entered its range, the pack bonds stirred inside her chest. Warm, familiar, alive. She had made it back. Old Halda was the first person to notice her. The tribe's healer was walking between shelters with dried herbs beneath one arm, when her gaze fell upon the bundle held against Isoria's chest. Halda stopped. The color drained from her face. Isoria. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. What have you done? Isoria did not answer. Kale stood outside the shelter they shared, sharpening a blade. The instant he saw the bundle, his expression changed. Come inside. His voice was quiet. Now. Their shelter was small and practical. 2 bedrolls, a fire pit. Weapons arranged against one wall. For 3 years, Isoria had considered it enough. Standing inside it now, holding Flory against her chest, the shelter suddenly seemed less like a home and more like a cage. I found her in the blizzard, Isoria said. Then she told Kale everything. The dead woman, the ravine, the infant. She explained it plainly, as she explained everything, without embellishment. When she finished, silence filled the shelter. Kale looked at the baby. And you brought it here. She was dying. Then you should have left her. There was no cruelty in Kale's voice. That almost made it worse. You know the chief's order. No new mouths. I know, Kale, but she was a newborn, alone in a blizzard. And the tribe is starving. He looked at Flory with the same detached assessment he used when deciding whether a wounded animal could survive. Take it back. Isoria shook her head. I can't. She'll die. Yes. Kale met Isoria's eyes. That is how this works. You know that. She did. She had always known. Survival in the Freelands had never been gentle. But understanding the brutal arithmetic in theory was one thing. Being asked to apply it to one particular small face was something else entirely. I'm not taking her back. Kale's jaw hardened. We have been forbidden from having children ourselves, he said, and you're willing to throw everything away for some stranger's foundling. He turned toward her. Be reasonable, Isoria. Leave it outside. In this cold it will happen quickly. The child won't suffer for long. His words settled over the shelter like frost. Isoria stared at him. This man genuinely believed he was offering mercy. Then Flory made a sound. Not a cry. A small, uncertain sound of discovery. Her mouth opened slightly, and she turned instinctively toward the nearest source of warmth. She was so new to the world that she knew nothing of tribal rules, food shortages, or merciless calculations. Isoria remembered that tiny hand stretching into empty air, reaching even after finding nothing. I can't, Isoria said. Kale watched her. Then his expression softened. Let me do it. Isoria went still. You won't have to watch. I'll carry it outside. It'll be over in moments. The silence afterward seemed louder than anything Isoria had ever heard. She looked at the man whose shelter she had shared for 3 years. He believed he was offering her kindness. "Don't touch her." Her voice had changed. Cale noticed. "Don't you dare come near her." Chief Brander summoned her within the hour. Isoria heard the runner's heartbeat before the boy reached her shelter. She knew what was coming before he spoke. She wrapped Flory securely against her chest and followed him. The central fire burned high. The entire tribe had gathered around it. More than 30 wolves stood in amber light and shifting shadow. Their combined scents rose with the heat. Isoria knew every one of them. She had hunted beside them, bled beside them, gone hungry so someone else could eat. Now none of them would meet her eyes. Chief Brander stood at the head of the fire. His lack of anger made his words worse. "Leave the child with Helda," he said. "She will handle it." "You mean she'll put her back into the snow?" Brander's expression did not change. Isoria lifted her chin. "If you're asking me to allow this child to die, then look at me and say exactly that." An uneasy murmur passed through the gathered wolves. Brander's gaze hardened. "I'm asking you to choose your pack, as you have always chosen your pack." He paused. "Refuse, and you are no longer part of it." Isoria looked around the circle, one face after another. She searched for one person willing to speak. Someone who might remind Brander what she had given these people. Someone who might say she deserved more than this. Humiliatingly, part of her was still searching for Cale, still waiting for him to step forward and say, "Enough. She is my mate. I stand with her." Cale stood at the far edge of the gathering. His arms were folded. His eyes were fixed on the ground. He never looked up. Isoria felt the pack bond inside her chest. 30 living presences. Warm. Familiar. The invisible web into which she had been woven since the day she was born. For a wolf, losing that bond was no small sacrifice. Then Isoria looked down at Flory. She remembered Cale calmly offering to carry the infant outside and let the cold kill her. If this was what they were, Isoria wanted to become something else. "Then I leave." She packed without speaking. Her best furs, her bow, a full quiver, both knives. The dried meat that belonged to her by right of her own kills. A fire kit. Cale watched her from across the shelter. His expression was unreadable, as it had been so many times during the 3 years they had spent together. "You could come with me," Isoria said. It was not begging. It was an offer. Clear. Final. Cale shook his head. "I won't die in the snow for a child that isn't mine." Isoria studied his face for a long moment. The same face beside which she had awakened for 3 years. I suppose this was never truly a mating. She lifted her pack. Only an arrangement. Then she walked away. The sentries opened the gate without a word. Isoria stepped through. Behind her, the gate closed. Chapter 3. Isoria stood motionless in the darkness outside the wall. The cold seemed different now. Inside her chest, the pack bond stretched thinner. She could feel the warmth of 30 lives fading behind her, fainter, further away, until finally there was nothing, only absence. A silence inside her where something living had always existed. She was alone, completely alone, in a way wolves were never meant to be, but she had no time to mourn it. A tiny face turned toward her beneath the furs. Flory was awake. The baby instinctively burrowed toward Isoria's warmth. The cold was already reaching both of them. If Isoria failed, Flory had no one else. And by every rational calculation, their odds were terrible. No pack. No real plan. Only a weakening blizzard, and one woman walking into it with a newborn. Yet there was no choice left to make. Isoria tightened the furs around Flory's head and started walking. She followed the downward slope of the valley, using the terrain as protection while the storm exhausted itself against the ridge above. Every 100 paces, Isoria pressed one hand against the tiny back strapped to her chest. Each time she waited until she felt it. The rise. The fall. Breathing. She continued through the entire night because stopping meant losing heat. Florrie had already begun making the restless sounds that came before real crying. At dawn, Isoria finally found shelter. A granite outcrop extended from the cliff far enough to stop most of the wind. The overhang was shallow, perhaps 4 feet deep and 6 feet wide, but it was enough. Isoria packed pine branches against the stone until they created insulation. She stretched her oilcloth across the exposed side. Then she crawled inside with Florrie and pulled every fur around them. The baby immediately began to cry. There was a problem Isoria had deliberately refused to think about during the last 4 hours, because she could neither solve it while walking nor afford to stop. Now the gray light of morning left no room to ignore it. Florrie needed milk. Isoria had none. She knew the theory. She had watched nursing mothers within her tribe, and she knew the shifter body was more adaptable than a purely human one. Knowing that was different from producing milk, because an infant needed it in the middle of a frozen wilderness. I know, Isoria murmured as Florrie cried. I'm trying. She brought the baby against her body and tried to nurse her. Pain came first. Far more than she had expected. Her body protested a demand for which it had never prepared. She could feel nothing happening. Florrie continued with furious determination. Come on, Isoria muttered through clenched teeth. She wasn't speaking to the baby. She was speaking to herself. You know what she needs. Figure it out. Eventually Florrie tired and fell asleep. Isoria could not tell whether the infant had received anything or had simply exhausted herself trying. That uncertainty was the worst part. Once daylight made movement safer, Isoria stripped, wrapped Florrie securely inside her clothes, and shifted. Her human senses disappeared beneath the far richer world of the wolf. The valley opened around her in layers of scent, pine, frost, deer trails leading northwest, water somewhere nearby. No predators close enough to pose an immediate threat, and no pack. That absence struck more sharply in wolf form. She pushed it aside. Within 10 minutes she returned to Florrie. She had learned enough. Water nearby, game present, no immediate threat. For now, that would have to be sufficient. The first real crisis came that night. The temperature dropped beyond what the pine branches and firs could contain. Florrie woke and cried without stopping. Again and again, Isoria tried to nurse her. She still could not tell whether her body was giving the child anything. Finally, she made a decision. Isoria placed Florrie in the center of their bed of pine boughs and wrapped her in every fur. Then she stripped quickly and shifted. In wolf form, she circled the infant once. Then again. She studied the child's scent. Milk, warmth, and something beneath both that caused Isoria's wolf to pause. She scented Florrie again. Then Isoria lay beside her and curved her body around the infant. Florrie quieted almost immediately. Isoria had expected more crying. Instead, the child made a soft, thoughtful sound and pressed herself against the warmth of Isoria's flank with the easy confidence of a creature that believed she had found her pack. Isoria remained still. That reaction meant something. Most shifter children did not manifest their wolves until 5 or 6 years of age, sometimes later. But even before the first shift, certain things were difficult to hide. A greater tolerance for cold. A scent beneath the ordinary smell of a human infant. Isoria had been too exhausted to study Florrie properly in the ravine. Now, lying in darkness with the baby against her fur, she finally admitted what her senses had been telling her from the beginning. Florrie was a shifter. That meant the dead woman had carried this newborn through miles of lethal weather, and the child had survived for reasons that went beyond luck or expensive cloth. Their odds had just improved. The nursing remained the problem at the center of everything. Florrie demanded food every few hours with absolute insistence. Isoria tried every time. She also began speaking to the child because it seemed to soothe her. On the second afternoon, Isoria looked down at Florie's intensely serious face as she nursed. I don't know whether this is working. Florie frowned with enormous concentration. I think something is happening. Isoria sighed. I just can't tell. That night Isoria shifted again. Florie slept against the warmth of her wolf's flank. It was strange. The absence of Isoria's pack should have felt strongest while she was a wolf. Instead, with Florie tucked against her side, she somehow felt less alone. The wolf inside Isoria understood before the woman did. This was her pup. On the morning of the third day, Isoria reached for Florie again. This time, she felt something different. Subtle. Unmistakable. Her body was responding. Florie nursed. And when she finished, she did not cry. Isoria sat among the furs holding her for a long time. Neither of them made a sound. Finally Isoria exhaled. All right. She looked at the baby's peaceful face. We're going to be all right. Chapter 4. On the fourth day, Isoria found the cabin. She smelled it before she saw it. Old timber. Cold ash. The damp decay of a structure the forest had slowly begun reclaiming. The cabin sat near a small valley where a frozen creek widened across a flat stretch of land. Dense pines protected it on three sides. The northern wind barely reached it. The eastern portion of the roof had collapsed. The door hung from one hinge. But the walls were made from solid old-growth timber. The hearth remained intact. There was water nearby. The position was sheltered and defensible. It would work. Isoria returned for Florie. They lived in the western half of the cabin, close to the hearth, while Isoria repaired everything else during whatever hours remained between feeding Florie, hunting, and surviving the cold. She patched the damaged roof with bark, pine branches, and packed snow. She rehung the door using leather hinges cut from the strap of her pack. The fire never went out. Isoria knew that if it died while Florie was inside, they would have only hours before the cold became dangerous. So she woke twice every night to feed the flames. On the second morning she set snares. By afternoon she had caught a rabbit. Isoria held it for a moment before cleaning it. Something tightly knotted inside her chest loosened a fraction. They were surviving. The nursing became steadier. Each day it grew easier. Isoria talked to Florie constantly. Not nonsense. Real things. One morning, while walking beside the creek, she pointed toward a print in the snow. Fox track. Florie made a sound against Isoria's back. Not wolf. She crouched. Foxes place their feet more carefully. Wolves carry more weight through the heel. Florie answered with another sound. You'll learn. Isoria straightened. You have time. Another evening, beside the fire, Isoria spoke of the woman from the ravine. Your mother loved you enough to run until there was nothing left in her. Florie watched her. That's what I know about her. Her boots were destroyed. So were her hands. Isoria gently touched the baby's curls. I'm going to try to deserve what she gave. What Isoria never spoke aloud was the other wound. The one that had nothing to do with weather. In one night she had broken a mating bond and walked away from a pack bond. Sometimes she caught herself listening for the warm, instinctive presence of 30 other heartbeats. Every time, she found silence. She had seen what losing multiple bonds could do to lone wolves. She had seen the empty look that remained in their eyes. But a wound was still a wound, and wounds required management. Isoria's method was simple. She worked. The worst night came during the second week. Isoria returned from checking snares after sunset and immediately knew something was wrong. Florie was feverish, not merely warm or restless, hot. Her cries carried a thin edge of exhausted misery. Isoria went back into the night. She traveled east along the creek until she found Willow. She stripped bark from the tree, returned to the cabin, chewed it into a paste, and carefully applied it to Florie's forehead, wrists, and feet. Isoria did not sleep. The fever finally broke the following evening. Afterward, Isoria sat beside the fire with Flory resting in her lap. Both of them were exhausted. Color had returned to the baby's face. Her breathing had become easy again. Isoria pressed one hand against Flory's small chest simply to feel it rise. Then Flory reached up, found a strand of Isoria's copper-colored hair, and immediately put it into her mouth. "That isn't food," Isoria told her. Her voice emerged rougher than she intended. Flory refused to release it. The weeks passed. Little by little, the cabin changed. The roof was sealed. The door hung properly. Drying racks filled with meat. Firewood accumulated beside the wall. Separate improvements slowly became something Isoria recognized. A home. Flory changed as well. Her dark hair thickened into soft curls. Her eyes became sharper and more alert. She began reaching deliberately for whatever interested her. Whenever Isoria spoke, Flory turned toward her. The expression on the child's face was unmistakable. Trust. Complete, simple, unconditional. Privately, Isoria found that trust more frightening than anything that had happened since the ravine. Near the end of the 6th week, Isoria sat in the cabin doorway with Flory in her lap. Behind the pines, the sunset turned orange, then deep purple. Smoke rose in a straight line from the chimney. The absence of Isoria's old pack was still present. A ghost of 30 lives inside her chest. But it had become quieter. She was learning to carry it. Flory wrapped her entire hand around one of Isoria's fingers. "We're going to be fine," Isoria said. Somewhere along the way, the words had stopped being something she said because she needed to believe them. Now she actually did. Flory grabbed Isoria's nose and smiled. Chapter 5. 6 months later, Flory had been talking for nearly an hour. Not actual words. She was still too young for that. But she produced a continuous stream of deeply serious noises aimed at the trees, Isoria's left ear, and occasionally the crow following them along the path. "Crow," Isoria told her. Flory responded forcefully. "Learn to watch them. They'll warn you when something is moving through the trees before your nose catches it." Flory grabbed Isoria's braid. The settlement appeared ahead. A muddy central square. A general store. A tavern. Several homes clustered around them. Petra's trading post occupied the largest building on the eastern side. Smoke curled from its chimney. Isoria could hear Petra's children before she even opened the door. Warmth struck her the moment she stepped inside. Wood smoke. Dried herbs. The unmistakable scent of a building full of people. "There she is," Petra said. She immediately came around the counter and reached for Flory. "She's perfectly fine where she is. She's been tied to your chest for an hour." Petra ignored Isoria and held out her arms. "Come here, little love." She carried Flory into the back room where her own children were playing. When Petra returned, she looked toward Isoria's pack. "Fox, rabbit, mink?" "2 mink. The creek is running better. What else do you need?" "Whetstone, dried grain, and something Flory can eat besides milk." Petra gave Isoria the warm look Isoria still did not entirely understand. "Oats. Boil them until they're soft." She began pulling supplies from the shelves. "She'll make an enormous mess." "That seems likely." "I also need to check the general store. They had steel snare wire last month. Go now. Hank will close for the afternoon soon." Isoria stepped outside again. The square was quiet, but not in its normal way. This was the silence of somewhere that had recently been busy and had abruptly stopped. A woman crossed toward the tavern, glanced toward the eastern alley, then immediately changed direction and hurried away with her head lowered. 2 men beside the well spoke urgently. One suddenly grabbed the other by the arm. Both disappeared indoors. Isoria stopped. Her nose detected it before her eyes found anything. A scent drifting from the eastern alley. Wild. Enormous. Something that made the wolf inside her become perfectly still. Isoria breathed more deeply. One primitive signal moved through the back of her mind. Apex predator. Threat. Then she heard quick footsteps. Small footsteps. Isoria turned. Tim was running across the square. Petra's 4-year-old son was chasing a ball rolling ahead of him. Tim. He did not hear her. Tim, come here. The ball bounced. Tim followed it. Then he stopped. A wolf stepped from the alley. The world seemed to narrow around him. He was enormous. Black fur covered a body built with terrifying power. His shoulder stood almost level with a man's chest. Green eyes swept across the settlement with the rapid assessment of a creature operating entirely through predatory instinct. Isoria had experienced alpha compulsion before. This was different. The pressure struck her chest and forced itself down through her shoulders. Every instinct screamed at her. Stay still. Lower your head. Do not challenge him. People around the square screamed. 2 women near the well ran. Someone shouted before slamming a shutter closed. The few other wolves in the settlement collapsed immediately into submissive crouches. Isoria locked her knees. Tim stood frozen in the middle of the square. The black wolf's lips lifted. Tim screamed. High, small, terrified. The wolf's entire body tightened. Every muscle coiled. From inside the trading post came Petra's voice. Tim. Isoria was already moving. She sprinted across the square, while alpha compulsion hammered against her with every step. She reached Tim and shoved him behind her. Stay behind me. She planted herself between the child and the wolf. Do not move. The wolf stared directly at her. His eyes were impossibly green. His scent hit Isoria in full force now. Blood. Wilderness. The mineral cold of deep forest. But beneath those scents was something else. A faint thread. Familiar. Impossible. It felt as though Isoria had smelled him before. But she knew she never had. The wolf stepped closer. Tim made a frightened sound behind her. Go, Isoria whispered. She never looked away from the animal. Do not run. She heard Tim move. Then Isoria spoke directly to the wolf. I see you. He charged. It was not a warning, not a test. A full attack. Isoria shifted before she consciously decided to do it. Her clothing tore away as her body transformed. She braced. The black wolf struck her like a falling tree. The impact drove Isoria backward through the snow. She fought for footing. Snapped. Snarled. But he was nearly twice her size, and he already had momentum. The wolf forced his weight above hers. His jaws closed around her throat. Isoria hit the ground on her back. The winter sky filled her vision. His entire weight pinned her beneath him. At full contact, the alpha compulsion exploded through Isoria. One command crashed into every animal instinct she possessed. Submit. She fought it. The wolf tightened his jaws. His teeth pressed against her jugular. One movement would end everything. Pinned beneath him, Isoria understood exactly how little the outcome depended on her own strength. Everything depended on whatever part of the man still existed beneath the feral animal. Then another instinct surfaced. Something deeper than strategy. Isoria stopped fighting. Completely. She turned her head and exposed her throat. The black wolf froze. The pressure of his jaws changed. His teeth loosened. Isoria remained perfectly still and allowed him to read her. Eventually, the wolf lifted his head. Isoria shifted back. Cold struck her naked body immediately. She lay human beneath him in the snow. She did not move. She only stared into the green eyes above her. Wild, broken, burning. There's a human inside you, she whispered. She slowly lifted one hand. The wolf did not stop her. Isoria placed her palm against the side of his jaw. His fur was rougher than she expected. Beneath it, his body felt feverishly warm. Feel him. She stared into his eyes. Then something moved through her. Low. Certain. A current beneath everything else. as though it had existed before she touched him, as though it had existed before she touched him, as though it would remain after her hand was gone. Isoria's breathing became shallow. She no longer noticed the cold. Come back. The wolf remained motionless. You're still in there. I can feel you. Her palm stayed against his jaw. Shift back. He stared at her. Nothing happened. Isoria waited. Slowly, she understood. He was not refusing. He couldn't. She lowered her hand. His green eyes remained fixed on her face. Then the wolf turned. 4 enormous, silent bounds carried him across the square. A moment later, he disappeared. Isoria remained on her back in the snow, staring at the place where he had vanished. Then the cold reminded her very thoroughly that she was naked. She sat up. Doors around the square began opening cautiously. Isoria stood. He's gone, she announced. The trading post door flew open. Petra ran outside with a blanket already spread between her hands. She wrapped it around Isoria immediately. Inside. Petra. Now. Isoria obeyed. The heat inside the trading post was almost painful. From the back room came Flori's cheerful, commanding babble. Isoria stopped. She listened. Something inside her loosened. Petra shut the door. She disappeared briefly, and returned carrying a hot drink and clothes. Shirt, trousers, socks. Don't complain about the sizes. Isoria dressed. Petra stared at her neck. Your throat. Isoria touched the place where the wolf's teeth had been. Warmth still lingered there. Not exactly pain. Not exactly absence of pain either. Tell me about that wolf. Petra did. He had appeared 6 months earlier. No known pack, no known origin. 5 wolves had challenged him. He killed all 5. An entire pack from the northern ridge had tried to force him out. He scattered them. 2 groups of hunters had gone after him. The first returned shaken and unwilling to speak about what had happened. The second group never returned. Then, 2 months earlier, royal messengers arrived. They placed a bounty on the wolf. Alive if possible. Dead if necessary. Royal messengers? Isoria asked. Out here? Petra nodded. This is only called free land because it's too brutal for His Majesty's kingdom to care about controlling. Isoria thought of Flori, the embroidered cloth, the pendant edged in gold, the crest she had hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the cabin. The wolf is a shifter. Petra studied her. He can't change back. Petra was silent for a moment. Then she said, You touched his face. Isoria looked at her. He had you pinned naked in the snow with his teeth around your throat. I remember. And after shifting back, you reached up and touched him. I know exactly what I did. Petra's expression remained patient. I'm asking whether you know why you did it. Isoria remembered those green eyes. Wild. Burning. Ruined. No, she said quietly. Chapter 6. Several mornings later, Isoria opened the cabin door at dawn and almost stepped onto a deer. She froze with one hand still resting against the doorframe. A full doe lay across the flat stone outside. Fresh steam rose from the body into the cold air. It had been positioned deliberately. A gift. Isoria's hand moved toward her knife. She studied the tree line carefully. Nothing. Then she listened. The forest carried the particular silence that followed something large passing through recently. Finally, she caught the scent. Blood. Wilderness. That unmistakable alpha presence. He had been standing outside her cabin while she slept. Isoria remained in the doorway for several seconds. Then she dragged the deer inside. She worked quickly to prepare it. For the rest of the day, she could not shake the sensation that something was watching her. The following morning, a rabbit waited on the same stone. The morning after that, a fox. Every animal was fresh. Every one had been placed carefully. And each morning Isoria stood in the doorway before sunrise, and sensed him somewhere beyond the trees. The awareness raised the hair along her neck, but it was not entirely fear. That was what disturbed her. She knew fear intimately. This was more complicated. Soon she began dreaming about him. The first time, Isoria only realized it after waking. Her pulse was racing. Her skin carried the strange awareness that followed being watched in darkness. The dream had been about the wolf, but not about their fight. It had been about the moment afterward, his weight over her. The warmth. That pull. Beside her, Flory slept peacefully with one fist open beside her cheek. "I'm losing my mind," Isoria muttered toward the ceiling. Every morning she began checking the tree line. Sometimes his scent was old, hours old. Sometimes it was fresh, very fresh. Those mornings Isoria's heart reacted in ways she refused to examine. After a week, she found his tracks. She had not been searching for them. Isoria was checking the southern snare line with Flory secured against her back when she crossed a trail through the snow. She stopped. The tracks belonged to something massive. Their path curved around the valley. Isoria followed the direction with her eyes. He had not merely crossed her land. He had circled it. A complete perimeter. She crouched beside the tracks. The realization came slowly. "How long have you been doing this?" No answer came from the forest. Flory reached for Isoria's braid. "He's been patrolling," Isoria told her. "Every night." She looked around at the silent pines. "I can't decide whether that should frighten me." Flory put the braid in her mouth. Helpful. That night, Isoria remained awake long after Flory had fallen asleep. She listened through the walls with her wolf senses extended into the darkness. She read every sound, every change in the scent landscape. Eventually she slept, and dreamed again. His heat. His scent filling her lungs. She woke before dawn, breathing hard. She was being hunted. Isoria gradually became certain of it, but not as prey. He was hunting her with patience, with intent, with the absolute certainty of an animal that had already made a decision. The problem was the way Isoria's body reacted to that knowledge. She told herself it was merely alpha compulsion. Any wolf would respond to a dominant signal that powerful. It was biological, instinctive, nothing more. Isoria repeated that argument to herself every morning. With each passing day, she believed it less. On the 14th morning, she felt him at the tree line, closer than ever before during daylight. Isoria stepped outside. She said nothing. Cold air moved between them. Then she saw him. The black wolf had moved partly from the shadows. Not close enough to threaten, close enough to be seen. Those vivid green eyes were fixed on her. "Thank you," Isoria said quietly. For several heartbeats neither moved. Then he disappeared into the forest. That night Isoria lay on her back in darkness. Flory breathed softly beside her. Her own blood felt too hot beneath her skin. The pull inside her chest had become impossible to deny. Isoria was afraid. But fear was not the only thing she felt. And whatever the other feeling was, it was beginning to win. Chapter 7. It happened because Isoria turned her back for 30 seconds. She was banking the fire for morning when she heard the familiar sound of determined crawling behind her. Flory had learned to crawl 3 weeks earlier. Isoria thought nothing of it. Then she turned around. The cabin was empty. The door stood open 3 inches. Isoria rushed outside. Her heart stopped. Flory was halfway across the clearing. The baby crawled through soft spring snow with absolute determination, straight toward the black wolf. He stood near the edge of the clearing. His entire body faced the tiny creature moving toward him. 12 feet separated them. Then 10. Isoria's knife appeared in her hand before she even remembered drawing it. She moved quickly and silently, calculating distance, angle, speed. Flory stopped. She sat back in the snow and looked up at the massive wolf with the grave, thoughtful expression she wore whenever something interested her. The wolf stared down. Florrie laughed, not nervously, a full, delighted baby laugh. Then she lifted both arms toward his face, with the complete confidence of someone who had never considered the possibility that what she wanted might be refused. "Bah," Florrie announced. The black wolf became absolutely motionless. So did Isoria. Because what happened next made no sense. His ears slowly lowered. Not in aggression. His massive body relaxed. The tension disappeared from his muscles. Then he lowered his head. Down. Further. Until his nose rested level with Florrie's outstretched hands. He inhaled. One long, deep, deliberate breath. He was examining her scent. Carefully. Searching for something. The quality of his stillness changed. Then a sound rose from his chest. Low. Broken. Almost a whine, climbing painfully upward. Isoria had never heard anything like it from him. She had never heard it from any wolf. It was too raw. Florrie patted his nose with both hands. Then she grabbed a loose fold of his lip and inspected it with intense concentration. "Bah," she explained again. The wolf remained perfectly still. His entire body trembled. His green eyes lifted toward Isoria. A question lived inside them. "You won't hurt her," Isoria said. She slowly lowered her knife. "I know you won't." Florrie grabbed one of his ears. She began babbling at length. The black wolf closed his eyes. Standing this close to both of them, Isoria suddenly caught the scent properly. She understood why his smell had always seemed familiar, why some piece of it had reminded her of something she could never identify, or rather, someone. Isoria frowned. She inhaled again, slowly, deliberately, the deepest note of the wolf's scent, and the deepest note of Florrie's. The same, not similar, the same root, the same unique signature found between blood relatives. Isoria stared at Florrie. The baby was attempting to climb onto the wolf's nose. "What are you to her?" Isoria whispered. The air changed. Isoria felt it before she saw anything. That familiar pressure. The strange charged instant immediately before a shift. But it came from Florrie. Isoria's eyes widened. She had never felt that energy come from a baby. "Florrie." Isoria stepped forward. Florrie shifted. It happened quickly. Nothing like the controlled transformation of an adult wolf. One instant, a baby sat in the snow. The next, a wolf pup. Tiny. Absurdly tiny. Black as ink. Barely larger than a rabbit. Florrie shook herself once, then looked up. The enormous wolf had raised his head. He stared at the pup. Again, that sound came from him. The broken, climbing whine, but this time it carried less pain. It sounded like something long imprisoned in darkness finally finding light. Florrie balanced unsteadily on 4 tiny legs. Then she launched herself at him. She collided with his nose, rolled through the snow, stood again with enormous dignity, and immediately attacked his face a second time. Florrie played with the same wholehearted joy she brought to everything else. She bounced against his jaw, scrambled across his scarred muzzle, made tiny sounds of delight, and the massive black wolf slowly began playing back, carefully, almost impossibly carefully. A tiny nudge from his nose sent Florrie rolling. She scrambled up and charged him again. He placed one enormous paw flat in front of her. Florrie climbed onto it, fell from the other side, ran around and tried again. Then the wolf licked her. One slow sweep of his tongue covered nearly the pup's entire body. Florrie looked deeply offended. A second later she was attacking his ear again. Isoria lowered herself into the snow. Her thoughts raced. Early shifts. She had heard stories. Cases so rare that most wolves treated them as legend. Children shifting months or even years before they should. Every known case shared one thing: rupture, separation from a parent, trauma powerful enough to reach into the blood and drag the wolf forward before its time. Isoria looked at Flory. The tiny black pup was currently attempting to fit an enormous wolf's ear into her mouth. Isoria breathed their scents again, the same bass note. She looked at Flory's black fur, remembered the dark curls of her human form, her green eyes. Then she looked at the massive feral wolf, at the broken creature who had appeared in the region 6 months ago, the same time Flory had entered Isoria's life. Isoria covered her mouth with one hand. He was her father. This feral, wordless creature who could not become human again was Flory's father. And something in Flory's blood had recognized him before anyone understood. Isoria stared at the wolf. He did not know. Not consciously. She could see that. But some part of him knew exactly what Flory was. Isoria sat in the snow for a very long time, and said nothing. Chapter 8. 3 weeks later, the wolf stopped sleeping beside the hearth. He started sleeping beside Isoria. The first night it happened, she told herself she would correct the arrangement the following morning. She never did. Instead, something else changed. Isoria started shifting simply because she wanted to. All her life she had used her wolf form for practical reasons. Hunting, tracking, warmth, rarely pleasure. Now she shifted before dawn and ran through the valley. The first time the black wolf moved into stride beside her, something settled inside Isoria's chest. This was what the pull had been trying to reach. In wolf form there was no confusion, no argument. Only the hum in her blood. Only the absolute animal certainty of him running beside her. At night, that certainty became almost unbearable. Isoria lay awake with the pull stretched so tightly between them that it felt like another sound beneath her skin. He was still feral. He still could not shift back. He could not speak, could not tell her his name. Isoria knew nothing about what had broken him. Nothing about the man he had once been. One night she rolled over. He was awake, watching her. Green eyes caught the faint light of the dying fire. The pull tightened. "I know," Isoria whispered. The wolf remained still. "I feel it too." He waited, patient, certain. Isoria reached across the space between them and rested her palm against his side. His body was warm. Always unnaturally warm. "You can't shift back." His eyes never left hers. "You can't tell me your name." He waited. Isoria studied him. This ruined, feral, unexpectedly gentle creature. The wolf who had dragged food through the snow for her. Who patrolled the valley every night. Who allowed Flory to climb all over his face. Who had become protection, companion, and something far more dangerous to her heart. Isoria finally admitted what she had known since the square. She belonged to him. Slowly, deliberately, she tilted her chin. She offered him her throat. "Then come on." The wolf moved over her. His weight was enormous. The alpha compulsion rolled through Isoria, but this time, it did not feel like the violent force that had struck her in the square. It was deeper. Softer. Her wolf responded with such profound relief that Isoria nearly became dizzy. Yes. This. Finally. The wolf's nose moved along her throat. Slow. Deliberate. Scenting. Isoria closed her eyes. His breath warmed her pulse. He stopped at the place where her neck met her shoulder. Teeth lightly grazed her skin. A sound vibrated inside his chest. Not warning. Not aggression. Something deep. Resonant. Almost reverent. Isoria shifted. Between one breath and the next, she became a wolf beneath him. His teeth closed around her shoulder. A single flash of clean, bright pain. And the bond opened. It struck like a door being thrown wide into blinding light. For months, Isoria had sensed his presence. Now she felt him. The inside of him. The grief first. Vast. Lightless. Ancient enough to feel endless. The pain was so deep Isoria nearly lost herself inside it. Then she felt his tenderness toward Flori. Raw. Confused. Aching. A father's love that existed even though the man no longer understood that he was a father. And underneath the grief, underneath the madness, something else. Something that pulled a cry from Isoria. Love. Fierce. Certain. Powerful enough to survive the destruction of his mind. He did not know his own name. He did not know Isoria's. Yet somewhere beneath memory, beneath language, beneath everything that had been taken from him, he knew she was his. Isoria had never been known that completely. She remained in wolf form beneath him, while the bond sang through her blood. The mating mark burned warmly at her shoulder. Chapter 9. After the claiming, Isoria was never entirely alone inside herself again. There was another heartbeat beneath her own, another warmth inside her chest. She felt him as constantly as she felt her pulse. When Flori cried during the night, Isoria felt his protectiveness. When all three of them rested together in the clearing, she felt his contentment. And always, beneath everything, she felt the grief. Sometimes something else broke through, without warning. A flash, a fragment, a woman's face laughing, then blood, screaming, rage so enormous it destroyed everything around it. And then the memory would vanish. The pull remained. It had existed since the day in the settlement square. Now they were mated, bonded. The mark remained warm where his teeth had entered her shoulder. The pull had become something deeper. Isoria always knew where he was. Her hand reached for his fur without thought. Her body oriented toward him instinctively. He scent-marked her often, deliberately, thoroughly. His nose moved along her jaw, throat, wrists. He layered his scent over hers with possessive certainty. They slept pressed together. Flori occupied the small room nearby. 3 weeks after the claiming, Isoria woke because something inside the bond had changed. The pull carried a new quality. Urgent. Specific. She remained motionless. Then realized what pressed against her back was not fur. It was skin. The arm lying across her waist was not a foreleg. It was human. A hand rested against her stomach. Large. Long-fingered. Scarred across the knuckles. Trembling slightly, Isoria stopped breathing. For almost a full minute she did not move. Then her heart gave one enormous beat. Slowly, she turned around. Black hair fell to his shoulders. Wild, tangled. His jaw looked almost carved from stone. Scars marked his body, across his arms, across his chest. He was enormous even in human form, broad-shouldered, powerfully built in the way of a man whose strength came from survival rather than appearance. Then Isoria looked at his eyes. Green. The same green she had watched in sunlight, snow, darkness, and firelight for months. But now they belonged to a human face, and the expression inside them was something she had never seen before. Hunger. Raw. Overwhelmed. Desperate. Not the uncomplicated need of an animal. This was conscious. Human. The gaze of a man who knew what he wanted, and was staring directly at it. At her. He reached toward her face. One large hand carefully cupped her jaw. Through the bond, Isoria felt the tenderness behind the gesture. His thumb traced her cheekbone, then the line of her jaw. The way he looked at her stole part of her breath. For the first time, Isoria became acutely aware that she was pressed against the body of a man. Neither of them was wearing anything. The bond carried his emotions into her, months trapped inside the body and instincts of a wolf. Now human again, now lying beside his mate. Need surged through him with an urgency that left little room for thought. The bond pulsed. Want. Possession. Mine. Finally. Mine. He kissed her. Isoria experienced it twice. Once through her own body, and again through the bond. feeling what touching her meant to him after months without human contact. His mouth moved over hers. She opened to him. A low sound escaped him and vibrated through them both. His hands traveled across her throat and collarbone, learning the shape of her. Isoria finally pulled away just enough to speak. "I don't know your name." He stared at her. Something shifted behind his eyes. His mouth opened. No words came. Isoria put her hand against his jaw. "It doesn't matter." Her thumb traced his lower lip. "You are mine." His hands continued exploring her with the same possessive certainty that marked everything he did. Through the bond, she felt his satisfaction whenever her breath caught. His need rose steadily. Her own answered it. Neither of them resisted. What passed between them in the darkness of the cabin, with Flory asleep in the nearby room and the fire burning low, was something Isoria could barely explain even to herself. They found one another completely, and through it all, the bond sang, bright, certain, whole. Dawn eventually filtered pale light through the frost-edged window. They slept. The next time Isoria woke, it was because every instinct inside her screamed that something was wrong. A stranger had entered their den, and he was standing over her mate. Chapter 10. The stranger was pressing a cloth against her mate's face. Isoria attacked before the thought completely formed. She hit the man with her full weight, dagger first. They crashed onto the cabin floor. He caught her knife arm with fast, trained reflexes. Isoria fought anyway, barefoot, wearing only a thin nightgown, furious. "What did you do?" She twisted free and recovered the dagger. In another second, the blade was against his throat. "What did you do to him?" The man stopped moving. "He isn't hurt." "What did you give him?" Isoria pressed the blade harder. "It isn't poison," the stranger said quickly. "He's only asleep, I swear." Isoria glanced toward her mate. He lay motionless among the furs. His chest rose and fell. Too slow, too deep. A stranger had stood over him, touched his face, and he had not awakened. Isoria drove an elbow into the back of the intruder's head, then rushed to the window. The valley was filled with soldiers. At least 40, perhaps more. They moved through the tree line in disciplined formations. Banners rose among them. Isoria stared at the crest. Something inside her memory caught. She had seen that symbol before. Isoria returned immediately to the bed. "Wake up." She grabbed her mate's shoulders. "I need you awake now." His green eyes opened, glassy, unfocused. Through their bond, Isoria felt him struggling upward through whatever drug held him. His lips moved. No sound came. Then his eyes closed again. The green disappeared. The bond became quiet. Isoria held his face between her hands. This was the first time she had truly seen him in full daylight as a human. The sharp jaw. Black hair spread across the furs. Scars crossing his chest and shoulders. He was beautiful, and completely vulnerable. An army waited outside. 3 sharp knocks struck the door. Isoria looked toward the room where Flory remained asleep. She could take Flory, run, but she could never carry him. Her jaw tightened until it hurt. A man's voice came through the door. "We come in peace." Calm, controlled. Isoria closed her eyes, opened them again, then moved toward the door. She opened it 6 inches and stepped behind it. The moment the man entered, Isoria put her dagger against his throat. "Nobody moves," she called toward the soldiers outside, "or I kill him." The man at her blade remained perfectly still. "They won't care, my lady." "Why?" "I'm not important enough." "Who are you?" "Renard, captain of His Majesty's Guard." "His Majesty?" "The Alpha King." Isoria stared. Renard continued. "Aring Shadcrest. What does your king want with us?" She sensed the answer before she saw him. Another Alpha presence filled the doorway. Heavy, powerful, controlled. Isoria looked up. The man standing there wore regal clothing, but his authority did not come from fabric or symbols. He carried himself like someone who had never needed to remind anyone who held power. Dark hair, green eyes, younger, less weathered. But the jaw, the eyes, Isoria's breath caught. He looked almost exactly like the man asleep in her bed. The newcomer made a broken sound. He pushed past Isoria, past her dagger, past Renard. He rushed toward the bed. Shock and grief transformed his face when he saw the unconscious man. "Don't touch him." Isoria was between them instantly. Her dagger rose again. The stranger stopped. "I would never hurt my brother." Isoria looked from one face to the other. The resemblance was undeniable. "You sent hunters after him." The man's expression tightened. "Your people ordered him captured dead or alive. Forgive me if I'm not moved by your concern for your brother." One eyebrow rose. "And who are you?" Isoria lifted her chin. "His mate." The king stared at her. His gaze traveled from her face to the rough cabin, her nightgown, and the hunting dagger she held. "My brother's mate is dead." His voice turned cold. "That's why he became this." He looked at Isoria with open dismissal. His mate was a princess, a queen, a woman worthy of his position. The king's mouth tightened. "You're not even fit to be his." Isoria bared her teeth. A sharp scream came from the back room. The king turned instantly. "You have a child here?" He stepped toward the doorway. Isoria blocked him. Her dagger came up between them. "Don't." "Captain." Renard moved. Isoria shifted to stop him as well. Then the small door opened by itself. A black wolf pup staggered through. Flori whined. Her legs trembled. She pressed herself against Isoria. Both men froze. Their expressions collapsed at exactly the same moment. Renard's face turned white. The king's cold composure vanished. Everything disappeared except naked shock. "Who?" the king whispered. Isoria lifted Flori immediately and held the pup against her chest. The king stared. His nostrils widened as he examined the scent. "She's Riven's." Isoria said nothing. "I can smell him on her." Isoria finally understood something else. The king carried the same bass note. The same scent beneath everything. The same one shared by Riven and Flori. Renard stared at the pup. "She's not only Riven's daughter." The king became very still. Renard looked at him. "Don't you recognize the other scent?" His voice dropped. "She's the queen's daughter." A pause. "She's Alicia's." The king closed his eyes as though someone had struck him. "No." His head moved slowly. "The baby died. She died with her mother." He looked toward Riven. Riven saw them. "That's why he—" The king could not finish. Renard spoke carefully. "Unless there was another." The king inhaled sharply. He looked back at Flori, then extended one hand toward her. Isoria stepped away immediately. But Flori had become completely still. She studied the king with grave green eyes. She did not reach for him, but she was not frightened. A moment later, Flori shifted. The black pup disappeared. A small, dark-haired child rested in Isoria's arms. The king stared at her face. "A twin." His voice broke. He continued looking at Flori. Something inside him quietly collapsed. "She even looks like Alicia." Isoria remembered the pendant. "Wait." Keeping Flori on one hip, she crossed to the loose floorboard. She lifted it, retrieved the pendant, then returned. Isoria held it toward the king. "This was with her when I found her." Aaron took it. His face changed the instant he recognized it. The woman carrying Flori was already dead. Isoria watched him. She had run until there was nothing left. Then she asked the question. "Was she your queen?" Aaron slowly shook his head. "No." His voice became controlled, almost flat, but Isoria could smell the grief beneath it. Alicia died inside the palace. His eyes moved toward Riven. She was killed during childbirth. Along with the child everyone believed she had delivered. Aaron's jaw tightened. Our uncle Valdis arranged it. Isoria stared at him. He wanted the throne. He needed the succession broken and Riven destroyed. Aaron looked down. No one knew Alicia was carrying twins. Silence filled the cabin. I was with Riven when he found them. Aaron's gaze moved toward his sleeping brother. His scent became almost unbearable with grief. He shifted. The king swallowed. He killed Valdis within seconds, then Valdis's guards, everyone who tried to stop him. Aaron shook his head. After that, he vanished. He looked at Riven's human body as if he still could not believe what he was seeing. I've searched for him ever since. Aaron's voice lowered. I never believed I would see him human again. The cabin became silent. Losing his mate, and believing he had lost his pup, destroyed him. Then Aaron straightened. He is the true ruler. Isoria looked at him. Riven Shadecrest is the true Alpha King. Aaron's gaze shifted toward Flory. Which makes her his heir. He paused. Our princess. Another pause. And one day, our future queen. Isoria instinctively tightened her hold around Flory. Renard spoke. Your Majesty, if the child survived, and Riven has returned to human form. He looked at Isoria. It's because of her. The king turned. For the first time, he truly looked at Isoria, not at her clothing, not at the cabin, at her. You really are my brother's mate. Isoria hesitated. Then she adjusted Flory on one hip and pulled the neck of her nightgown aside. The mating mark was visible on her shoulder. Renard exhaled. A fated bond. His voice was quiet. Only a fated mate could have reached Riven deeply enough to bring him back. He isn't completely back. Isoria stopped. She looked toward Riven. She thought about every fragment that had passed through their bond. The laughing woman. Blood. Screaming. The invisible barrier that appeared whenever his memories came too close. When the memories return, he can't bear them. Understanding crystallized as Isoria spoke. He retreats somewhere they can't reach him. She finally understood the pattern. Riven had not remained a wolf because he had forgotten how to become human. He had stayed a wolf because the wolf could survive memories the man could not. Isoria held Flory closer. The king spoke after a moment. A nursemaid must have realized what was happening and escaped with the child. Not a nursemaid. Renard's voice had changed. Quieter. The midwife. Aaron looked at him. Sora. The king's expression shifted. Renard. Renard lowered his head briefly. I'm sorry for your loss. Renard nodded once. Then he met Isoria's eyes. My wife. His throat tightened. She disappeared the same night. I never knew what happened. He stopped. She loved Queen Alicia. Understanding crossed his face. She must have delivered the first child. When Valdis came, she hid the baby and ran. She ran as far as she could, Isoria said. She kept her voice steady. Renard deserved to hear every word clearly. She tried to reach the free lands. But this place is brutal. Help is scarce. Winter was worse that year. Renard did not move. She died using the last strength she had to keep Flory alive. Isoria met his eyes. Your wife saved her. A pause. I owe her everything. Isoria bowed her head toward him. For several seconds, Renard remained completely still. Flory. He looked at the child. That's what I named her, Isoria explained. When I found her, she was only a few weeks old. She looked down at the dark-haired little girl. There was a winter flower growing through a crack in the rock beside her. Isoria touched Flory's hair. So I called her Flory. Renard nodded. His jaw tightened. He did not trust himself to speak. Aaron had been watching Isoria. He looked at his brother sleeping on the bed, then at Flory. Finally, The king crossed the cabin and went down on one knee before Isoria. "What you have done?" Aaron looked up at her. "For my niece." He glanced toward Riven. "For my brother." His voice carried the full authority of a king. "I and the entire kingdom owe you everything." Epilogue. These days, Riven was human more often than not. Some mornings Isoria woke with his arm resting heavily across her waist. His human breath warmed the back of her neck. Other mornings, she woke alone and found an enormous black wolf curled beside the cabin door. Those were good mornings too. Isoria had stopped measuring his recovery that way. Riven was healing. Slowly. Never in a straight line. There were still days when grief rose suddenly and swallowed him. Once, after returning from one of those days, Riven had looked at Isoria. His voice remained rough from disuse. "I am half the man I used to be." Isoria had taken his face between her hands. "I love you anyway." Riven pressed his forehead against hers. Through their bond, Isoria felt everything he still could not say. His love was vast, absolute, without edges. Flory helped him more than anything else. She was walking now. Or attempting to. She had developed the inconvenient habit of shifting in the middle of a step. One instant a small girl would be toddling across the cabin. The next, a black wolf pup would be scrambling across the floor. Flory had also discovered that Riven's wolf form made an excellent climbing structure. Whenever he shifted, she hauled herself up his flank with both fists buried in his fur. Riven could not always remember everything, but he always felt the bond. And he always knew Flory. Aaron visited whenever he could. The first meetings had been difficult. Riven would become still whenever his brother approached. A low growl would build inside his chest. But Aaron never pushed him. He waited. Eventually, Riven began allowing his brother to sit nearby. Later, he permitted Aaron to rest one hand briefly against his shoulder. During one visit, Aaron spoke privately to Isoria. "Come home." Isoria looked at him. "Riven is our king." Aaron paused. "Which means you are our queen. He can't be your king again." Isoria looked toward Riven. "Not yet." Then she added quietly, "Maybe never." Aaron nodded. He already understood. Isoria did agree to tutors for Flory. Twice each week, a woman came to the valley and taught her the things a princess was expected to know. Flory approached every lesson with grave seriousness. Then immediately afterward she ran to Riven and reported everything she had learned. He listened to every word. Some afternoons, Aaron brought his children. All three. Loud, joyful. Soon the clearing would fill with shouting children and small wolves. Sometimes Isoria would look across the clearing and find Riven watching them, smiling. She did not know what their future would become. For the first time in her life, she no longer needed to know. There was only one future change she was already certain of. Her own body had been telling her for 3 weeks. A new scent. Subtle. Growing stronger. Riven noticed before she spoke a word. One morning he suddenly became very still. Then he lowered himself in front of Isoria. He pressed his face against her stomach, and remained there. Through the mating bond, Isoria felt the realization strike him. First disbelief, then joy so enormous that there was nowhere inside him large enough to contain it. A child. Theirs. That evening, Riven pulled Isoria into his lap. He was fully human. Entirely himself. Entirely hers. His green eyes studied her with the expression Isoria had never managed to name. Later, beside the dying fire, he held her with the quiet intensity that had become uniquely his. When they finally lay together beneath the firs, Isoria rested against his chest. Riven pressed his lips into her hair. For several moments he said nothing. Then, at last, the words came. "I love you." Isoria smiled against his skin. Outside the cabin, the valley was quiet. Flory slept nearby. Their child grew safely inside Isoria. Riven's arms remained wrapped around her. It was enough. It was everything.